Welcome back to the deep dive. I have to admit, when I first looked at the reading list you sent over for today, I definitely hesitated.
Oh, I don't blame you. It looks a bit formidable, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, we've got ancient Latin texts, dense theological treatises, modern psychological analysis, and some pretty heavy biographical data. On the surface, it looks like a massive pile of homework.
Yeah, a lot of people see the stack of sources we're using, things like excerpts from the Confessions, his treatise on continence, City of God, and they immediately think dusty academia.
Right, exactly. But then I actually started reading. And at the center of all this paper is a guy that I think everybody recognizes by name, but almost nobody actually
For
knows.
sure. We are talking about St. Augustine, Augustine of Hippo.
Yeah, and here's the thing. When I hear St. Augustine, and I think most of you listening are probably in the same boat, I have this very specific mental image. I picture, a statue.
Or a stained glass window.
Yes. An old guy in heavy robes, holding a burning heart, looking very holy, very detached, and just very
Unapproachable. The great doctor of the church.
right. But digging into these sources, specifically his confessions and the letters surrounding his life in Milan, that image just completely shatters. This isn't a statue. This is a guy who is messy.
Incredibly messy.
He's neurotic. He's arguably the first modern man.
I would absolutely agree with that. He is really the first person in Western literature to turn the camera inward and
Yeah.
document his own psychology in real time.
Yeah.
He's the original archetype of the tortured intellectual.
And what he's tortured by is so relatable and it's almost uncomfortable to read. He has this central conflict that basically runs his entire life.
The war within.
Exactly. He desperately wants to be good. He has this vision of the person he wants to be, noble, controlled, wise. But he finds himself completely unable to stop doing what he knows is wrong.
He's smart enough to know the path, but he's too weak to walk it.
Yep.
It's the universal human dilemma, right? The good that I want to do, I don't do, but the evil I don't want to do, that I end up doing.
And that brings us to the tension we really need to unpack today. Because when you look at the specifics of Augustine's life, especially his young adulthood, his sexual history, his total inability to control his impulses, we have a very modern reflex.
We want to diagnose him.
We do. We look at his behavior and we immediately slap a clinical label on it. We say, oh, I know what this is. This guy is a sex addict.
It's a very common reading today. You look at the compulsive behavior, the cycle of acting out followed by intense shame, the way it interfered with his life and his relationships. It looks exactly like the criteria for sexual addiction.
It reads like a modern DSM case study. So here is our mission for this deep dive. We are going to test that label.
Okay.
We're going to look at Augustine's own words, the heartbreaking story of his long-term partner, and the theology he developed to explain his own brain. And we're going to ask, was Augustine a sex addict in the modern clinical sense? Or is he describing something else entirely, something the sources call spiritual slavery?
It's a critical distinction. And I want to be clear right up front. This isn't just playing word games. How we define the problem determines the solution. If it's just biology, you treat it one way. If it's spiritual, you treat it completely differently.
Before we get into the heavy stuff, I want to address the listener who might be thinking, okay, why do I care? I'm not a 4th century monk, and I'm not necessarily religious. Why does Augustine's diary matter to me today?
Because Augustine effectively created vocabulary for how the Western world thinks about desire and the will
Yeah,
and the self.
full framework.
Exactly. Whether you are a devout Catholic or a complete atheist, if you have ever tried to break a bad habit and failed, or felt like your mind was telling you one thing and your body was doing another, you are living in the landscape Augustine mapped out. He's the first guy to really ask, why do I do things that make me unhappy?
That is the big question, isn't it? Okay, let's look at the roadmap for the show. First, we're going to look at the personal story. The facts of his relationship with a woman known only as the concubine. And I have to warn you, this part of the research really messed with me. It is absolutely tragic.
It is arguably the most painful chapter of his life.
Then we're going to get into his head and define his terms. We need to talk about lust, or what he calls concupiscentia. Spoiler alert, it's not just about sex.
It's not all.
And finally, we'll tackle that big question of addiction versus sin and how he eventually found a way out. It's a heavy stack of material, but the payoff is huge.
Let's dive right in.
Okay, set the scene for us. We're in the late 4th century. Augustine is young, he's brilliant, he's an up-and-coming rhetoric professor. He's essentially a celebrity academic in the making.
A rising star.
Right. And he's living in a relationship that I think most people completely misunderstand.
Yes, the terminology here is really tricky. We hear the word concubine, and we have all these cultural associations, right? We think of a mistress or a sex worker or a harem member. We think of something casual, illicit, maybe a bit tawdry.
Yeah, like sneaking around, hooking up.
But the sources paint a completely different picture. This relationship started around 370 AD in Carthage. Augustine was about 17 or 18 years old. He meets a woman, and we will definitely get to the issue of her missing name later, and they move in together. And this wasn't a fling.
No, not at all. The timeline in the note says they were together for roughly 15 years.
15 years.
That is longer than most modern marriages. That's a whole life together.
Precisely. This was a faithful, long-term, monogamous relationship. In the Roman world at that time, this was actually a recognized social institution. It was known as concubinatus.
Wait, so it was legal. It wasn't just them, living in sin under the radar.
No, it was a legal tier of relationship just below full marriage. It was very often used when there was a class disparity. Augustine was from a family with some status. They weren't ultra-rich, but they were respectable, what they called curiales. She was likely lower class, perhaps a freedwoman. Roman law made it very difficult, socially and legally, for them to have a full matrimonium.
So concubinatus was the workaround.
Exactly. It wasn't shacking up in the modern sense. It was a stable, recognized domestic partnership.
And the emotional bond. I mean, Augustine isn't cold about this in his writings.
Not at all. In the Confessions, he explicitly says he was faithful to her. He says his heart, quote, clave to her.
Clave, that's a very biblical word. It implies kind of fusion.
It implies that they were one flesh and they had a child together, a son.
Adiodatus.
Yes. And do you know what the name means?
It translates to gift of God.
Right. Gift of God.
Which is such a telling name, I think.
Yeah.
You don't name a child gift of God if you think the relationship he came from is shameful or dirty.
Exactly. So sources mention that Augustine was absolutely in awe of this kid. He writes about Adiodatus being incredibly intelligent, noting with a bit of fatherly pride that the boy was smarter than he was at that age.
That's actually really sweet.
It is. So you have to picture this domestic life. Augustine, this woman, and their brilliant little boy living together, moving from Carthage to Rome, and finally settling in Milan. She is his partner in every sense except the legal title. She manages his household, she raises his son, she supports his career.
But then we hit the wall. It's around 385 AD. Augustine is in Milan. He's reaching the absolute peak of his career. He's the imperial rhetorician.
Which is basically the press secretary for the emperor.
Right. He's rubbing shoulders with the court. He's made it. And suddenly, the relationship has to end. Why?
It's a brutal collision of ambition, societal pressure, and family dynamics. Specifically, Augustine's mother, Monica.
Oh man, Monica. She has a whole deep dive on her own. She's intense.
She is a force of nature. She'd followed him to Milan, and she was very focused on two things, his salvation and his worldly success. She wanted him to have a quote-unquote legitimate marriage, a power marriage.
She wanted him to marry up.
Exactly. She found a match for him, a young heiress from a wealthy, noble family. This marriage would secure Augustine's social standing and fund his political ambitions. But there was a massive problem.
The woman he'd been living with for 15 years.
Right. Under Roman law, you couldn't have a wife and a concubine. And because the concubine was lower class, she was viewed by Roman society and by Monica as an impediment.
Oof. That word makes my skin crawl. An impediment. We're talking about the mother of his child.
It's incredibly cold. It is calculating. And yet, Augustine went along with it. The arrangement was made. Augustine was betrothed to the heiress. But to make that happen, the impediment had to be removed.
This part of the Confessions, I actually want to read the direct quote because summaries just don't do it justice. Augustine describes the moment they separated. And he doesn't say it was for the best. He doesn't say he felt relieved to be doing the right thing.
Go ahead, read it.
He writes, "My heart, which clave unto her, was racked and wounded and bleeding."
Racked and wounded and bleeding.
That is physical trauma language. That is the description of an amputation.
It is. It's one of the most raw descriptions of heartbreak in all of ancient literature. He is telling us that ripping this woman out of his life left him permanently damaged.
And what happens to her? This is the part that made me so angry reading the notes. What happens to the woman?
She was sent back to Africa.
Sent back, like unwanted cargo.
Essentially, yes. She returned to Carthage. But this is where the story gets incredibly revealing and where the sources highlight a massive contrast between her character and Augustine's. You might expect her to be furious. You might expect her to find another protector, another arrangement.
I would expect her to burn the house down, honestly.
Right. But instead, the sources tell us she made a vow. She vowed perpetual chastity and, quote, never to know another man. She effectively entered a religious life. She accepted this separation, this intense trauma, as a moment to turn completely to God.
So she becomes a nun.
For all intents and purposes, yes,
Yeah.
she takes the high road, the absolute highest road possible.
And Augustine, the great intellectual, the future saint, the guy who's supposed to be the hero of the story, what does he do?
He falls apart. He completely collapses. Remember, the girl he is betrothed to is too young to marry. She's roughly 10 years old, and legal marriage age at the time is 12. So he has to wait 2 years.
2 years of celibacy.
And he couldn't do it. He explicitly says he was not strong enough to imitate his former partner.
Yeah.
He writes that he was a slave to lust. So almost immediately after the love of his life is sent away, he goes out and procures another concubine.
Wait, pause. Let me get this straight. He's heartbroken. His heart is bleeding. He loves this woman so much that losing her feels like death. And yet he immediately replaces her with a random body. That's just repulsive, honestly. It makes him look incredibly weak.
And he knows it. That is exactly the point Augustine is trying to make in the text. He isn't painting himself as the hero here. He is painting himself as the villain. He's highlighting the bitter irony. The woman, the supposed sinner who was sent away, proved to be spiritually superior. She had the strength of will to embrace God. Augustine, the man of the mind, the great philosopher, was utterly controlled by his flesh. He literally could not sleep alone.
So this lust he talks about, it's not just, oh, I like sex. It's a compulsion. It's a deep dependency.
It is a profound weakness. He looked at her strength and saw his own total lack of control.
There's one detail we danced around earlier, and I want to hit it head on right now. We keep calling her the concubine or the woman because Augustine never names her. In millions of words of writing, he never writes down her name. To a modern ear, that feels like erasure. It feels like he's trying to delete her from history. Like, I'm the famous saint, you're just the mistake. Is that what's happening?
It's a very valid reaction. But most scholars in our source stack argue that something else entirely is going on. There are actually 3 layers to this silence.
Okay, give it to me.
First, genre. The Confessions isn't a memoir in the modern celebrity sense. It is a long, extended, very intimate prayer to God. The focus is on his sin and God's mercy. Naming other people, especially people involved in his sins, will be seen as a distraction from the theological point.
Okay, so it's not about them. It's about him and his relationship with God.
Exactly. Second, and this is the most charitable interpretation, protection. Remember, she went back to Africa and took a vow of chastity. She was living a holy, quiet life in a monastic setting. If Augustine, who eventually becomes a very famous, very controversial bishop, writes a bestseller detailing their 15 years of illicit sex and actually names her.
Oh, he's doxing her.
Yes, exactly. He is exposing her to scandal and judgment from his political enemies. By keeping her anonymous, he protects her privacy and her dignity in her new life.
That actually makes a lot of sense. So by not naming her, he's respecting the sanctity of her new life.
Yes. And finally, there is a literary convention at play. Early church writers often left figures anonymous to make the story universal. If he names her Monica or Julia, she becomes a specific historical woman. If she remains nameless, she represents anyone. She becomes a symbol of the human condition, or in this specific case, a universal symbol of the sacrifice he wasn't strong enough to make.
Okay. I can accept that. It doesn't make the heartbreak any less real, but it makes the silence feel less malicious.
Ooh.
But there is one more detail about the breakup that we have to mention. The boy. Adeodatus.
Yes.
She goes back to Africa. Does she take the son?
No. Adeodatus stayed in Milan with Augustine and his grandmother, Monica.
She left her child.
She did.
As a parent, that is just the knife twist. She gives up her partner and her child.
It underscores the absolute severity of the situation. Whether she was forced to leave him behind by Roman law, which strictly gave the father custody in these cases, or whether she believed he would have a better life with Augustine's rising status and wealth, we don't know for sure. But it was a total severance. She lost everything.
And Augustine is left with the boy, the immense guilt, and a new concubine he doesn't even love.
Right. And this brokenness, this realization that he just destroyed his own family because he couldn't stand up to his mother or his own ambition, and that he couldn't live without sex even for a short time. This is the engine that drives his entire theology.
Which leads us perfectly into part 2. Augustine realizes he is broken. He calls the problem lust. But based on the readings, when Augustine says lust, he doesn't just mean feeling horny.
No, not at all. And we need to do some serious translation here. The Latin words are libido or concupiscencia. And while they definitely include sexual desire, the concept is massive. It's basically a theory of everything.
So define it for us. What is concupiscentia?
Fundamentally, it is disordered attachment or disordered love. Augustine defines it as, quote, that affection of the mind which aims at enjoying oneself and one's neighbor without reference to God.
Without reference to God. Break that down. What does that look like?
Augustine thinks entirely in terms of order. You are supposed to love things according to their actual worth. You love God first because he is infinite and unchanging. You love people second. You love material things last. Lust is when you flip that order.
So if I love money more than I love people, that's lust.
Yes. If you loved your career more than your family, that is concupiscencia. If you love a person as if they were a god, expecting them to give you perfect, infinite happiness, that is also lust.
That's fascinating. So you can lust after a person even in a committed, loving relationship.
Absolutely. If you're trying to consume them for your own satisfaction,
Yeah.
rather than loving them as a fellow creation of God, you were essentially using them. There's a famous Latin phrase that Martin Luther later used, but it comes directly from this Augustinian idea.
Incurvatus in se.
Curved in on oneself. Exactly. The healthy soul looks outward, at God, at others. The lustful soul curves inward. It tries to suck the whole world into itself to fill a void. It's like a black hole of need.
And this connects to that Civil War concept he talks about, right? The flesh versus the spirit.
Yes. And this is where we have to talk about the Garden of Eden. Because Augustine has a theory about Adam and Eve that usually blows people's minds when they first hear it.
Yeah, this is the part of the reading I really struggled with at first. Augustine speculates that in a perfect world before the fall of man, there would still be sex, right?
Yes. He wasn't anti-sex. Despite his reputation, he believed God created bodies to procreate, and that was a good thing.
But he says it would have been different.
He believes that before the fall, the sexual organs would have moved in total obedience to the will, just like your hand.
Okay, stop right there. What does that mean? Like your hand.
Think about it. If you want to raise your hand, you don't have to wait for your hand to get in the mood. You don't have to seduce your hand. You just will it, and it moves. It is a seamless, perfect connection between mind and body. Augustine thought sex in Eden should have been exactly like that. A calm, rational, completely voluntary act of the will.
That sounds robotic. It sounds entirely passionless.
To us, living in a post-fall world where passion is everything, it sounds robotic. But to Augustine, it sounded like true freedom. He thought that the fact that we can't control our sexual reactions, the fact that we get aroused when we don't want to, or we don't get aroused when we do want to, is hard evidence of a broken link.
Wait, so the erectile dysfunction ad is basically proof of original sin?
In Augustine's view,
Yeah.
yes.
Wow.
The fact that the body has gone rogue is the punishment itself. He calls it a rebellion in the flesh that directly mirrors our rebellion against God. We disobeyed God, so now our bodies disobey us.
So when he talks about lust, he's not saying desire itself is bad. He's saying uncontrollable desire is a sickness.
Precisely. He highly values the will. He wants to be the captain of his own ship. But he finds that there is a mutiny below decks. His sexual organs, his temper, his ambition, they are all moving independently of his command.
This brings us to the core conflict. We have a guy who literally cannot control his body. He feels compelled to seek out a replacement concubine, even when he's deeply grieving. He describes a law of sin in his members. To a modern listener, this sounds like one thing and one thing only.
Addiction.
It sounds exactly like clinical addiction.
It does. Listen to his language from the text. He says, of whom a man is overcome, of the same is he the slave. Or this one, I was bound not with another's irons, but by my own iron will. He describes a relentless cycle of trying to stop, failing, feeling immense shame, and then just doing it again.
Well,
If you walked into an AA meeting or a Sex Addicts Anonymous meeting today and just read those passages out loud, everyone would not. They would say he's one of us.
so here's the big question for part 3. Is it addiction or is it sin? Because in our modern world, we really tend to separate those two things. Addiction is a disease. Sin is a bad moral choice.
This is where we have to be very careful with the sources. If you ask a secular psychologist today, they might say, well, Augustine clearly had a sex addiction and an anxiety disorder. And that might be clinically medically true, but Augustine isn't interested in a clinical diagnosis. He is interested in the theological root of the problem.
But wait, if we call it a disease, doesn't that sort of let him off the hook? I mean, if my brain is wired for dopamine hits, how is that a sin? How can I be blamed for a chemical imbalance?
It is exactly the pushback the modern disease model offers. It says it's not a moral failing, it's a pathology, it's biology. But Augustine would push back extremely hard on that.
How? How does he justify the blame?
He would ask, how did the chains get there in the first place? Augustine readily acknowledges that right now he is a slave. He can't break free on his own. But he argues that the slavery is a direct result of a habit he willfully fostered. He writes, lust served became custom, and custom not resisted became necessity.
So he's saying, I built the prison brick by brick and now I'm locked inside.
Yes, he accepts full responsibility for the origin of the addiction. It started with pride. It started with a choice. But there is a deeper layer here that I think is incredibly fascinating for modern listeners, even completely secular ones. It's the concept of counterfeit worship.
This was the part of the notes that really made me stop and think. Explain counterfeit worship.
The idea is that addiction essentially mimics religion. Think about the behavior of a severe addict, whether it's to alcohol, gambling, or sex. What do they actually do?
They obsess over it.
Right. They organize their entire day around it. They make huge sacrifices for it, sacrificing money, relationships, their own dignity. They turn to it when they are sad for comfort. They turn to it when they are happy to celebrate. They're seeking a radical change in state, a moment of transcendence.
They're treating the substance like a god.
Exactly. The addict is looking for something infinite, infinite peace, infinite distraction, infinite pleasure. But they're looking for it in a finite thing.
So the bottle becomes the idol.
Yes. And because the bottle is finite, it can never, ever satisfy the infinite hunger. So you need more, and then more, and more. That is the very definition of addiction, a hunger that grows the more you feed it. Augustine would say, of course you're addicted. You are trying to use sex to do God's job.
That is a really powerful reframing. It takes it out of just chemical dependency and puts it into the realm of an existential crisis.
It explains why the addiction is so insanely powerful. It's not just a bad habit. It's a spiritual quest gone horribly wrong.
But we have to address the sin part of this. Modern Catholic moral theology, which obviously bases a lot of its framework on Augustine, has had to grapple with what we know about the brain now. We know trauma rewires the brain. We know genetics play a huge role in susceptibility. Does the church still say it's entirely your fault?
It's actually very nuanced. The source material references Pope John Paul II and the Modern Catechism. The church has actually integrated the psychological view. They explicitly acknowledge that addiction has genetic, environmental, and social causes. They call it a wound.
A wound feels very different than a crime.
Right. If you are wounded, you need a doctor, not a judge. And they also acknowledge that addiction severely impairs freedom. And this is key. In Catholic theology, for something to be a mortal sin, the really bad kind that severs your relationship with God, you have to have full knowledge and full consent.
And an addict doesn't have full consent. The craving is driving the bus.
Exactly. So the theology says the addiction diminishes your moral culpability. You aren't fully free, so you aren't fully guilty of every single slip-up.
That's surprisingly merciful, actually.
It is. They view addicts as children of God who are suffering, not as broken machines. However, and here is the catch, they don't let you off the hook entirely.
What's the catch?
You might not be fully responsible for the craving or even the relapse in that exact moment of weakness, but you are responsible for seeking recovery.
So you can't just throw up your hands and say, well, I have a disease, so I guess I'll just keep cheating on my wife.
Correct. You have a moral duty to walk toward the hospital. You have to take the steps to get well. Your freedom is diminished, but it's not entirely erased.
That feels like a very fair balance. It acknowledges the lack of control, but demands agency in the solution.
Which brings us to part 4, the solution itself. How did Augustine actually get out? Because he's stuck. He's a slave to lust. He's tried willpower. He's tried philosophy. He's read all the Stoics about mastering your passion.
Yeah, none of it worked.
No. He has this great realization about the law. He says the law, meaning the rules, the 10 Commandments, the moral code, is just like a signpost. It tells you where to go. It clearly says, do not commit adultery.
But a signpost doesn't give you the gas to get there.
Exactly. He writes, the law commands what is good, yet gives it not. Knowing what is right is completely useless if your will is broken. You can stare at the signpost all day long, but if your car's engine is destroyed, you aren't moving an inch.
So if willpower is the car, and the car is broken, what actually moves him?
Grace.
Okay, grace is a very churchy word. We hear it all the time. Amazing grace. What does it actually mean in this specific Augustinian context? Is it just a magic zap from heaven?
No, not at all. This is honestly the coolest part of Augustine's psychology. He argues that human beings act according to what they love. We are driven by delight.
We do what brings us joy.
Right. You cannot force yourself to do something you hate forever. Willpower eventually runs out.
Yeah.
You get tired. Augustine realized that he was sinning because he loved the sin. He found delight in the lust. It gave him a rush.
Sure. I mean, that's why it's tempting in the first place.
So he realized that to stop sinning, he didn't need more rules. He didn't need a stronger whip. He needed a new delight. He needed to love God more than he loved the sex.
He needed a better offer.
Yes. Grace, for Augustine, is God changing your heart so that you actually prefer the good. It's not just, I really want to do this bad thing, but I'm going to white-knuckle it and hold back. It's, I don't even want to do the bad thing anymore because I have found something infinitely better.
That's the change of heart people talk about in long-term recovery.
It is. He calls this gift continence. And he realized he couldn't manufacture it. He couldn't study his way into it. He had to beg for it. There is his famous prayer, Lord, give what you command and command what you will.
Translate that for us.
He's saying, you are commanding me to be chaste. I can't do it. My car is broken, so you have to give me the power to do it. You have to do the work inside me.
It's total surrender.
Total, absolute surrender.
It reminds me so much of the first step of AA. We admitted we were powerless and that our lives had become unmanageable.
And the second step came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Augustine is basically the patron saint of the 12 steps. He lived it 1,600 years before Bill W. wrote it down. He hit rock bottom. He finally realized his ego, his brilliant professorial celebrated ego, could not fix his own soul. And he just collapsed into the arms of something bigger.
And that's where the tortured intellectual finally found peace. Not in being smart, but in being saved.
Yes, it wasn't an intellectual victory at all. It was a victory of love.
Let's pull back and look at the whole picture for a second. We started this deep dive with the concubine, the woman who was sent away.
The silent figure in the background of all this theology.
I can't help but feel that his entire theology, this whole idea of I am weak, I need grace, I can't do it alone, is built directly on the memory of her.
I think that is a very astute reading of the history. He saw her make a sacrifice he literally couldn't make. He saw her choose God when he chose a new bedmate out of desperation. That humility, that devastating knowledge that, oh, I am the weak one here, is the foundation of everything he wrote later.
So in a strange way, she taught him what grace actually looked like.
She did, and she paid a terrible, terrible price for it.
So why does this matter to us? We aren't 4th century bishops. We might not be dealing with the exact same dramatic life choices. But this deep dive has stuck with me more than most we've done.
I think the universal truth here is that we are all fragmented. Augustine validates the experience of the divided self. If you feel like there is a civil war inside you, Augustine says you aren't crazy, you're just human.
And you aren't going to win that war just by trying harder.
Right. You need connection, you need help, you need to step outside of your own ego and receive grace, however you define that.
I want to leave the listener with a final thought that has been nagging me ever since we discussed counterfeit worship. It's a bit of a challenge.
Go for it.
If Augustine is right, if lust is actually just a disordered attempt to find worship and satisfaction in things that fundamentally can't provide it, what does that say about our modern lives?
That's a terrifying question.
We live in a world literally designed to feed us finite goods. Infinite scrolling on social media, 24/7 work emails, rampant consumerism, the constant pursuit of likes and retweets. Are these just bad habits, or are they misdirected worship?
Are we kneeling at the altar of the algorithm?
Exactly. Are we trying to squeeze divine infinite satisfaction out of a glowing rectangular screen? And if we are, is that why we are all so incredibly anxious? Because we are worshiping gods that can't hear us.
Our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. That is his most famous quote from the Confessions. And I think it perfectly applies to whether thee is God or truth or love. If you try to rest your infinite heart in your phone, it will never rest.
Something to really think about the next time you reach for your pocket in a quiet moment. What are you actually looking for?
Indeed.
That's it for this deep dive into St. Augustine. A deeply complicated man, a tragic love story, and a map of the human heart that still works perfectly 1,600 years later. Thanks for listening.